Hi, the collision of worlds. Eleanor Winters moved quietly through the hospital corridors at 3 a.m., her mop making gentle swishing sounds against the polished floor. Most of the lights were dimmed at this hour, leaving the hallways in a peaceful half-glow that Eleanor had come to prefer over the harsh fluorescence of daytime. The night shift suited her. Fewer people to dodge, fewer eyes watching her work, and most importantly, the solitude gave her mind space to wander into the stories she loved to create. Subparenthesis. At 42, Eleanor had worked as a hospital janitor for nearly 15 years. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep her modest apartment and support her 19-year-old daughter, Penny, who was in her first year of community college. What most people at Memorial General didn't know was that Eleanor had once dreamed of becoming an illustrator. Those dreams had been carefully packed away when she'd become a single mother at 23, replaced by the more immediate needs of diapers, formula, and stability. Tonight, she worked the 5th floor, oncology. Eleanor always took extra care here, knowing that the patients behind these doors were fighting the hardest battles. She hummed softly as she worked, an old folk song her grandmother had taught her. The melody kept her company as she emptied trash cans, wiped down surfaces, and disinfected doorknobs. Invisible work that rarely received acknowledgement, but made a difference nonetheless. "You're still here." The voice startled Eleanor, causing her to knock over her bucket. Water splashed across the freshly mopped floor, and she cursed under her breath. "I'm sorry," said Dr. Dominic Farrell, stepping back from the spreading puddle. He made no move to help, instead checking his expensive watch, a habit that matched his reputation. "Farrell," Eleanor said, quickly grabbing her mop. "I'll have it cleaned up in no time." Dominic Farrell was something of a legend at Memorial General. At 46, he was the youngest chief of neurosurgery in the hospital's history. His hands had saved countless lives. His research had been published in prestigious medical journals, and his technique was studied in medical schools across the country. He was brilliant, methodical, and completely devoted to his work. He was also known for his exacting standards and cool demeanor. "I didn't expect anyone to be on this floor," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "I needed to review some files before tomorrow's procedure." Eleanor nodded, keeping her eyes on her work. "The night is young, doctor. Some of us are just getting started." Something in her tone, perhaps the hint of gentle rebuke, made Dominic look at her properly for the first time. Eleanor Winters wasn't what he expected. Despite the unflattering uniform and the messy work, there was a dignity in her posture, a quiet confidence. Her hands, though reddened from constant cleaning, moved with surprising grace. "You work the night shift regularly?" he asked, surprising himself with his curiosity. "5 years now," Eleanor replied, wringing out the mop. "It works better for me. I can be home when Penny needs me during the day." "Penny?" "My daughter. She's studying nursing. Actually, first year." Dominic nodded, suddenly aware of how little he knew about the people who kept the hospital running. His world consisted of other surgeons, researchers, patients, and the occasional hospital administrator. The cleaning staff were as invisible to him as the air he breathed. "Well, I'll let you get back to your work," he said, turning toward the records room. "Dr. Farrell?" Eleanor called after him. When he paused, she added, "The files for tomorrow's patient, James Withers, they're not in the usual place. Nurse Fleming moved them to the secondary cabinet because the main one is being repaired." Dominic blinked in surprise. "How did you know which patient I'm operating on tomorrow?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "I pay attention. Good luck with the surgery. That boy deserves a miracle." As she resumed mopping, Dominic stood watching her for a moment longer. He had performed over 2,000 surgeries in his career, but he couldn't recall the last time someone had wished him luck or spoken about a patient with such genuine concern. In his world of precision and protocols, Eleanor Winters suddenly seemed like an anomaly. Someone who cleaned floors, but noticed the human details that he often overlooked. He found himself walking away, deep in thought, wondering what else he had failed to see while focusing so intently on being the perfect surgeon. The feeling was unsettling, like discovering a blind spot he never knew existed. What Dominic couldn't know was that Eleanor had her own reasons for remembering James Withers. Each night after her shift, she left small illustrated cards for certain patients, anonymous gifts of encouragement. Tomorrow's surgery would determine whether the 12-year-old boy would walk again, and Eleanor had spent her break drawing him a superhero version of himself standing tall on mountain peaks. Two different worlds had momentarily collided in that hospital hallway, one of precision and prestige, the other of quiet service and unseen kindness. Neither Eleanor nor Dominic realized that this chance encounter at 3 a.m. would be the first of many that would gradually change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Beneath the surface, the rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the hospital parking lot into a maze of puddles and sending a constant stream of weather-related injuries into the emergency room. Eleanor arrived for her shift soaked, despite her umbrella, her worn sneakers squelching against the tile as she made her way to the staff locker room. "Eleanor, just who I needed to see," called Greta, the night shift supervisor. Her normally pristine uniform looked rumpled, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "We're short-staffed tonight. 2 call-outs already. I need you to cover the surgical floor instead of oncology." Eleanor nodded, hiding her disappointment. She had planned to check on James Withers tonight. The boy's surgery with Dr. Farrell had been scheduled for 3 days ago, but she hadn't been able to find out how it went. "No problem, Greta. I'll head up there now." "You're a lifesaver," Greta said, already turning to address another crisis. The surgical floor was busier than oncology, even at night. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, monitoring machines and checking on post-operative patients. Eleanor kept to the edges, working methodically through her cleaning routine, invisible in the controlled chaos. When she reached the east corridor, she noticed the light still burning in the conference room. Through the partially open door, she could see Dr. Dominic Farrell sitting alone at the long table, his head bowed over a stack of medical charts. Even from a distance, Eleanor could sense something was wrong. The confident posture she associated with the surgeon was gone, replaced by the unmistakable slump of defeat. She should have moved on. This wasn't her business. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the memory of her late husband, Michael, who had carried his burdens alone until they crushed him. Or maybe it was simply that no one should look that alone at 2 a.m. Eleanor knocked softly on the door frame. "Excuse me, Dr. Farrell. I need to clean the room." Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes momentarily unfocused before recognition dawned. "The night janitor," he said, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, right?" She was surprised he remembered her name. "Yes, sir. I can come back later if—" "No," he interrupted, gathering his papers. "I should go home anyway. It's late." As he stood, a photograph slipped from between the files and fluttered to the floor. Eleanor bent to retrieve it, a clinical image of a brain scan with alarming red areas highlighted. She handed it back without comment, but not before recognizing the patient name in the corner, James Withers. Dominic took the image, his fingers trembling slightly. "Do you know what perfection costs, Eleanor?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure what you mean. My record was 97%, 97% success rate for high-risk neurosurgeries." He gestured to the scan. "Now it's 96.8. Eleanor understood then. The surgery hadn't gone well. "The boy, James, he didn't make it. He's alive," Dominic said flatly. but the tumor was more invasive than the scans showed. I couldn't remove it all without risking catastrophic damage. He'll need another surgery, but his body needs to recover first. His parents are devastated. They believed in me. The bitterness in his voice was directed inward. Eleanor considered her response carefully. When Penny was 7, she broke her arm falling from a tree. The doctor said it perfectly, but it still took weeks to heal. Medicine isn't just about the procedure, Dr. Farrell. It's about giving the body time to do its own work. That's a simplified view, he said, but without the condescension she might have expected. Maybe, she agreed, but sometimes simplicity has its place. A silence fell between them, surprisingly comfortable. Eleanor moved to empty the trash bin, giving him space. Your daughter, Dominic said suddenly. The one studying nursing. How is she doing? The unexpected question made Eleanor pause. She rarely discussed her personal life at work, especially with doctors who typically looked through her rather than at her. She's struggling right now, actually. Her financial aid fell through this semester. I'm picking up extra shifts, but tuition increases next term. She hadn't meant to share so much, but something about the late hour and the raw honesty of their exchange had lowered her guard. Dominic nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. There's a scholarship program through the hospital for children of staff pursuing medical careers. It's not well publicized. He reached for a pen and scribbled something on a notepad. Talk to this person in administration. Tell them I suggested you apply. Eleanor took the note, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, but we'll manage. We always do. It's not charity, he said, seeming to read her hesitation. The program exists to find talent. If your daughter has half your attention to detail, she'd be an asset to nursing. Before Eleanor could respond, Dominic's pager beeped. He checked it with a frown. Emergency surgery. I have to go. He gathered his files and moved toward the door, pausing briefly. Your perspective is refreshing, Eleanor. Not many people speak to me without agenda these days. After he left, Eleanor stood in the quiet room, turning the note over in her hands. The interaction had been strange, almost surreal. The prestigious surgeon and the night janitor finding common ground in an empty conference room. She tucked the note into her pocket and began cleaning, her mind drifting to the stack of bills waiting at home and Penny's tearful phone call that morning. What Dominic couldn't know was that Eleanor was facing a crisis of her own. Her landlord had served an eviction notice 3 days ago. The building was being converted to luxury apartments. They had 30 days to find a new place in a city where affordable housing was increasingly scarce. The extra shifts she was taking weren't just for Penny's tuition. They were a desperate attempt to save enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. Meanwhile, in operating room 3, Dominic scrubbed in mechanically, his mind still lingering on the conversation with Eleanor. Her words about giving the body time to heal echoed as he prepared for the emergency craniotomy. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him with such straightforward honesty. His colleagues tiptoed around his reputation. His subordinates feared his criticism, and his few remaining friends knew better than to challenge his medical opinions. As he entered the operating theater, a strange thought occurred to him. The woman who mopped the hospital floors had, in 5 minutes of conversation, seen something in him that others missed. The realization was both unsettling and oddly comforting as he prepared to once again hold someone's life in his skilled but increasingly isolated hands. Pause. H1. The bridge between the windows of Memorial General's pediatric wing, casting warm rectangles across the floor that Eleanor had polished just hours earlier. She wasn't supposed to be here now. Her shift had ended at 6 a.m., but she couldn't leave yet. Not when her small side project remained unfinished. In a storage closet rarely used by the regular staff, Eleanor had created a makeshift studio. A fold-out table held her art supplies, watercolors, brushes, and stacks of thick paper. For the past 3 months, she had been staying after her shifts to create illustrated story cards for the children in the oncology and pediatric wards. What had begun as a single drawing for James Withers had evolved into dozens of personalized cards, each featuring a child reimagined as the hero of their own adventure. Eleanor dipped her brush in water, blending a perfect sky blue for 7-year-old Talia's story card. The little girl was scheduled for her final round of chemotherapy today, and Eleanor wanted her to have something special to mark the occasion. In the illustration, Talia stood atop a defeated dragon, a metaphor for cancer that the girl herself had suggested, her hospital gown transformed into shimmering armor. Eleanor's hand jerked, sending a streak of blue across the card. She turned to find Dominic Farrell standing in the doorway, looking out of place in his crisp white coat. "Dr. Farrell," she stammered, instinctively moving to hide her work. "I was just leaving." Dominic stepped into the small space, his eyes taking in the dozens of illustrations pinned to the walls. Children as astronauts, knights, scientists, and explorers. The mysterious cards. The nurses had been trying to figure out who's behind them for months. His gaze settled on her with new interest. The children love them, especially James. He keeps his by his bed. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "James is still here? How is he doing?" "Better," Dominic said, picking up one of the completed cards. It showed a boy in a wheelchair, releasing butterflies that gradually transformed into stairs beneath him. His second surgery is scheduled for next week. I've consulted with a colleague from Johns Hopkins. We have a new approach. Prepare. Dominic set the card down carefully. "You're an artist." Eleanor said, "I used to be, once upon a time with my child. Now I just do this. For the kids," he replied, surprising her with the firmness in his tone. His vitals improved for the first time in days. The nurses called it coincidence. "I'm not so sure." Eleanor looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "They need something to look forward to, something beyond white walls and medical equipment." "You never mentioned this when we spoke before." She shrugged. "It didn't seem relevant to our conversation about perfection and medicine." "But it is," Dominic insisted, leaning against the small table. "You've created a bridge between clinical treatment and human connection. These cards are doing something my surgeries alone cannot." The frank admission from someone of his stature caught Eleanor off guard. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Penny. "Mom, the landlord's here again. Says we need to be out in 2 weeks now, not 30 days. What do we do?" Eleanor's expression must have changed because Dominic straightened, suddenly professional again. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," she said automatically, years of pride making it impossible to share her troubles. "I really should go, Dr. Farrell. My daughter needs me." He nodded, stepping back to let her gather her supplies. "You should show these to Dr. Weston in pediatric oncology. The department has a patient comfort initiative that could use your talent." "I'm not looking for a job, Dr. Farrell. I already have one." "It wouldn't replace your current position," he clarified. "It would be supplemental. Paid, of course." Eleanor paused, the financial implications immediately apparent. Extra income could help with the new apartment deposit. Still, she hesitated. "I don't have formal training. No degree in art therapy." "But you have results," Dominic countered, gesturing to the wall of illustrations. "And that interests me far more than credentials." As Eleanor left the hospital that morning, her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities and problems. The offer of additional work was tempting. But how would she manage the hours with her already exhausting schedule? And even with extra income, finding affordable housing in 2 weeks seemed impossible. What she didn't know was that Dominic remained in the storage closet long after she left, studying her illustrations with the same intensity he usually reserved for brain scans. Something about Eleanor's work had struck a chord in him, a reminder of why he had become a doctor in the first place. Before the prestige and the publications, there had been a simple desire to heal, to make broken things whole again. 3 days later, Eleanor arrived for her shift to find an envelope with her name in her locker. Inside was an official letter from the pediatric department, offering her a position as a creative therapy specialist for 15 hours a week at a surprisingly generous hourly rate. A note in now familiar handwriting was paper-clipped to the letter. "Your perspective is needed here. DF." That same evening, Dr. Weston introduced her to the pediatric staff, not as Eleanor the janitor, but as Ms. Winters, the new art therapy specialist. The transition was jarring. Some nurses who had walked past her for years suddenly saw her for the first time. But the children, especially those who had received her cards, welcomed her with immediate acceptance. As her first official session ended, Eleanor spotted Dominic observing from the hallway. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod of approval before continuing his rounds. No words were exchanged, but something significant had shifted between them, a mutual recognition of value that transcended their different positions in the hospital hierarchy. That night, as Eleanor mopped the floors of the surgical wing, still keeping her night job despite the new opportunity, she found herself humming again. The melody carried her through the quiet corridors, past sleeping patients and busy nurses' stations. When she reached James Withers' room, she paused to peek through the window. The boy was asleep, his bedside table covered with cards, some from family, some from hospital staff, and right at the front, her illustration of him standing on mountain peaks. Beside his bed sat Dominic, not in his white coat but casual clothes, quietly reviewing scans. He looked up, as if sensing her presence, and after a moment's hesitation, motioned for her to come in. "I wanted to thank you," Eleanor said softly, careful not to wake James, "for the recommendation." "The department needed someone like you," Dominic replied, his voice equally low. "I simply pointed out what was already evident." Eleanor studied him, the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "You're worried about his surgery." It wasn't a question, and Dominic didn't treat it as one. "Yes," he admitted. "The first attempt was humbling. Sometimes our greatest work comes after failure," Eleanor offered. "At least that's true in art." Dominic considered this, looking from her to the sleeping boy. "Perhaps medicine isn't so different." He stood, gathering his things. "I should let you finish your work." As he reached the door, Eleanor spoke again. "Dr. Farrell, would you like a card for James for after his surgery? Something to give him when he wakes up." The request seemed to catch Dominic by surprise. For a moment, the carefully maintained professional mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. "I would, thank you." They parted ways in the quiet hospital corridor. The renowned surgeon and the janitor-turned-art therapist, connected by an unexpected bridge of mutual respect and a shared concern for the boy sleeping peacefully down the hall. Unaware of the unlikely alliance forming on his behalf. H1. Breaking point. The hospital board meeting room felt stifling despite its size. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat, acutely aware that she was the only person at the long mahogany table not wearing a suit or white coat. 6 weeks into her dual role as janitor and art therapist, she had been unexpectedly summoned to this meeting by Dr. Weston. "As you can see from the preliminary data," Dr. Weston was saying, gesturing to the charts displayed on the screen, "patient satisfaction scores in pediatrics have increased by 12% since implementing the Creative Therapy Initiative." Board members nodded approvingly, making notes. Eleanor stared down at her hands, calloused from years of cleaning and now perpetually stained with watercolor. Ms. Winter's work has been particularly impactful with our long-term patients, Dr. Weston continued. Recovery times appear to be improving, especially in cases where children actively engage with the art therapy sessions. Eleanor had not expected this level of formal evaluation. What had begun as simple drawings to brighten a child's day had been transformed into charts, metrics, and data points. Hospital Administrator Richard Blackwood cleared his throat. While these results are certainly interesting, Dr. Weston, we must address the financial implications. The current budget deficit requires cuts across all departments. Surely not pediatrics, Dr. Weston protested. We're finally seeing meaningful improvements. No department is exempt, Blackwood replied coldly. The board has already approved a 15% reduction in all non-essential programs. I'm afraid your creative therapy initiative falls squarely in that category. Eleanor felt her stomach sink. The additional income had been a lifeline, allowing her and Penny to secure a small apartment after their eviction. Without it, they would struggle again. If I may, came a voice from the doorway. Dominic Farrell stood there, his presence immediately commanding attention. I'd like to address the board regarding this matter. Blackwood frowned. Dr. Farrell, this meeting was not on your schedule. And yet here I am, Dominic replied smoothly, stepping into the room. Because I believe you're about to make a critical error in judgment. The tension in the room thickened as Dominic walked to the front, nodding briefly to Eleanor as he passed. She had barely seen him in recent weeks, except in passing as he checked on James Withers, whose second surgery had been more successful than anyone anticipated. 2 months ago, Dominic began, I performed a high-risk procedure on a 12-year-old boy named James Withers. The first attempt was unsuccessful. The second, performed with a modified approach, succeeded. He paused, looking directly at Blackwood. The difference between failure and success wasn't just surgical technique. It was the patient's psychological readiness, his belief that recovery was possible. Eleanor watched, amazed, as Dominic pulled up his own set of data on the screen. These are readmission rates for pediatric patients before and after Ms. Winter's program began. Note the 17% reduction. If we convert that to financial terms, he clicked to the next slide, showing dollar figures that made several board members sit up straighter. The savings far outweigh the program costs. That's speculation, Blackwood argued. Correlation doesn't imply causation. True, Dominic conceded. So let me offer something more concrete. He distributed folders to each board member. These are testimonials from parents, nurses, and physicians, documenting specific cases where the creative therapy initiative made a measurable difference in patient outcomes. Eleanor hadn't known about any of this. Dominic had obviously been building this case for weeks. Furthermore, he continued, I'm prepared to reallocate funds from my department's research budget to sustain this program until the next fiscal year, when its value will be even more apparent. The board members murmured among themselves. Eleanor caught fragments. Unprecedented. Farrell never shares his research funds. Must really believe in this. Blackwood's expression hardened. Dr. Farrell, your dedication to your pet project is admirable, but this is highly irregular. The board has already. The board can reconsider, Dominic interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Unless you'd prefer I take this data and my concerns about premature budget cuts to the hospital trustees. I believe they meet next week. The threat hung in the air. Everyone present knew that Dominic Farrell, with his reputation and donor connections, had the influence to make things very uncomfortable for the administration. After a tense silence, Blackwood relented. We'll review your proposal and reconvene to discuss. As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor remained seated, processing what had just happened. Dominic approached her, his professional mask firmly in place despite what he'd just done. "Thank you," she said simply. "I merely presented the facts," he replied, gathering his materials. "Your work speaks for itself." Still, Eleanor persisted. "You didn't have to get involved." Dominic paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "There was a time when I measured success solely by surgical outcomes. You've reminded me that healing involves more than technical precision." He checked his watch. "I have rounds. We'll speak later." Eleanor watched him leave, struck by the transformation in the man she had first met mopping floors at 3 a.m. The cold, perfection-driven surgeon had become an unexpected ally, risking his own standing to defend her work. Later that evening, as Eleanor worked on a new series of illustrations for the oncology ward, her phone rang. It was Penny, calling with news. She'd been accepted into an advanced placement program for nursing students, with a full scholarship. Her academic advisor had recommended her after receiving a letter from an anonymous donor praising her potential. Eleanor knew immediately who was behind it, though she couldn't prove it. The realization both warmed and troubled her. Dominic Farrell was becoming entangled in her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. The invisible inheritance. 1 year later, Eleanor stood in the newly dedicated Children's Healing Arts Center at Memorial General, scarcely believing the transformation. What had begun in a storage closet now occupied an entire wing, with bright murals, art stations, and a staff of 4 therapists under her direction. Children filled the space, some in wheelchairs, others trailing IV poles, all engaged in creating. "Quite a change from mop buckets," came a familiar voice behind her. Eleanor turned to find Dominic, looking less severe than when they'd first met. The past year had softened him somehow, though his reputation as a brilliant surgeon remained untarnished. "I still keep my night shift," she reminded him with a smile. "Old habits." "Maintaining perspective," Dominic corrected. "Something you taught me." Their relationship had evolved into an unusual friendship, professional, respectful, but with an undercurrent of something neither had named. They rarely saw each other outside the hospital, yet each had profoundly affected the other's path. "James is being discharged tomorrow," Dominic said, changing the subject. "Final scans are clear. He'll need follow-ups, but he's officially in remission." Eleanor's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful. I finished his graduation card yesterday. He asked if you'd be there when he leaves." "Of course," she promised. "Wouldn't miss it." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the children working on their projects. In the corner, a young resident physician was attempting to draw alongside a giggling patient. Part of the new integration program Dominic had championed, where medical staff participated in creative sessions to build rapport with their patients. The board approved the expansion to 3 more hospitals in the network, Dominic informed her. "They want you to oversee implementation." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "Me? But I don't have the credentials," Dominic finished with a rare smile. "Neither did I, for defending an art program. Sometimes we find ourselves doing things we never trained for." The next morning, Eleanor and Dominic stood side by side as James Withers walked out of Memorial General on his own feet, a backpack of cards and drawings slung over his shoulder. His parents embraced them both with tearful gratitude, unable to express in words what these 2 very different hospital employees had given their son. As the family drove away, Eleanor turned to Dominic. "You saved his life." "We both did," Dominic corrected. "Different parts of it." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. "I have something for you. A thank you, of sorts." He handed her a small box. Inside was a silver pendant, a bridge spanning 2 different shores. "For bridging worlds," he explained. uncharacteristically hesitant. The clinical and the human, science and art, my perspective and yours. Eleanor touched the pendant gently, understanding its significance. The most valuable things can't be measured or quantified, she said softly. I know that now, Dominic agreed. And I have you to thank for it. As they walked back into the hospital, the surgeon and the janitor turned healing arts director. They moved with the comfortable rhythm of two people who had found unexpected value in each other's different worlds. Neither could have predicted that a chance encounter at 3 a.m. would lead to this moment, or to the programs now helping thousands of patients. What they had built together was their true legacy, an invisible inheritance of compassion and purpose that would continue long after their time at Memorial General ended. It was, as Eleanor had once suggested to Dominic, the bridge between clinical treatment and human connection, between technical excellence and emotional healing. In the end, it wasn't about money or prestige or perfection. It was about recognizing the value of invisible things, kindness, creativity, human dignity, and the courage to see worth in unexpected places. These were the priceless gifts they had given each other, transforming not just the hospital, but themselves in the process. As Eleanor placed the pendant around her neck, she knew that their story was still unfolding. The bridge between their worlds had become a path forward, one they would continue to walk together, discovering new ways to heal both others and themselves along the way.